Mark Willenbrink has been a professional artist and illustrator for over 26 years. In addition to creating art, Mark enjoys teaching and leading workshops on basic art instruction, both drawing and watercolor painting. He has been a contributing editor for Watercolor Artist magazine with over 30 articles. Additionally, he has written 2 books, Drawing for the Absolute Beginner and Watercolor for the Absolute Beginner, which he co-authored with his wife Mary. His students love him for his calm, confident approach to creating art and his encouraging demeanor. In this workshop, Mark will share his basic step-by-step techniques for getting started as an artist. To learn more about Mark Willenbrink's art and workshops, log on to www.shadowblaze.com.
I'm Mark Willenbrink. Today we're going to have fun with watercolors and learn some things along the way. We're going to be doing 2 workshops in this one video. For our first workshop, we will be doing a wet-on-wet sky with the painting of a tree painted wet on dry. Our second workshop will be a wet-on-dry tree image. To get started, we'll first need to know what materials to use. The paper we will be using will be 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. The 140-pound refers to the heaviness of it. Cold press referring to the surface, cold press being a somewhat bumpy surface. For the palette, I'll be using a plastic plate. If you want to do something a little bit nicer, you can buy a palette like this. This is my normal palette that I use. If you're a beginner, you may not want to invest as much money as something like this costs. The colors we'll be using will be 3 colors, red, yellow, and blue. The yellow being cadmium yellow medium, alizarin crimson, and Prussian blue. Of these colors, we can mix just about all other colors. The paints that I like to use are professional grade. They're easy to work with, they're soluble, and the colors are bright. If you're starting out, you may want to use student grade. The colors won't be quite as bright. For instance, this is cadmium yellow. It has real cadmium in it. Some student grade paints may be called cadmium yellow, but they don't actually have cadmium, which makes them bright. Other supplies we'll be using, we'll need a 2B pencil, a kneaded eraser. An eraser like this is soft and pliable. It's not very rough on the paper. Since we'll be painting on the surface of the paper, we want to be gentle on the paper. A spray bottle. The brushes we'll be using will be round brushes, 3 round brushes, a number 8, number 14, and a number 26. When picking out brushes like this, you want to make sure that they make nice points. These are round, meaning that just the shape of them is round. I'll also be using an 1.5 wide flat brush. This is a nice brush because it holds lots of paint. You can see from the side how thick it is. So now I want to start the painting. First, I need to put the paper down. With this paper, I've already drawn the tree image. Notice I just used the 2B pencil, 2B being good because it doesn't smear much when painted over, and also it's easier to erase if I don't want the pencil lines at the very end. For this first demo, we're going to make this paper very wet. So we want it to be very secure on the board. Oh, and I need to mention, we'll be using a board. Notice this is just a trimmed down piece of plywood. I put marks on here just to help me line it up when I put it down. What I want to do is just put the paper down, take masking tape, and go around the edges with it. Making it nice and secure. Since this is watercolors, we're going to be making this paper very wet. It's going to want to buckle and curl, but this is one way that when it's all dried, it should dry relatively flat. There are other methods to securing watercolor paper to a board, but for this demo, this is what I've found to be the easiest to work with, and it works relatively well. Other methods of stretching it may include using staples or wetting the paper down first and securing it with sealing tape. I think that's a lot of work for just this. So. With the paper secure, I can now get the paints ready. I'll only be using these 3 colors. I want to prepare the paints before I do any of the painting. I want to set this up similar to my color wheel. It'll just help me remember what colors make what. I also want to put down the alizarin crimson. And the Prussian blue. Notice I'm being generous with these paints. I'll be using a lot of paint. And once again, in the middle of the process, I don't want to have to reach over and get more paint out. To keep my plastic plate on the table secure, I've put down just some rubber cement, I've put down some kneaded eraser. That'll just keep it in place a little better, so it's not sliding and moving around when I'm working. Now, I want to mix the paints. I have these paints ready, but with watercolor, you want to dilute the paint to the right consistency. Also, I want to put in some secondary colors. These right now are the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. So what I want to do is start mixing the paint. Also, I have 2 water containers. One will be to add water to the paper. The other water will be used to mix the paint. And I use my rag to wipe off my brushes as I need to. So I'm going to start mixing this paint. I'm using my number 26 round brush to do this. I could use my flat brush that I will be using, but sometimes I can get a chunk of paint in this brush, and then when I'm streaking the paint across here, I'll smear paint that I don't want to. So I've found it's better to mix the paint with a round brush. What I want to mix up first is the color orange. To do that, I want to grab from this yellow, after putting some water on the palette, and put it out there. I can also use some of this yellow to grab from when I'm doing the painting. Now I want to just clean out the brush. Now I want to grab from the red. I'll mix some on the palette so it's the right consistency to grab from. Then I want to grab some water from the clean water and put that in the yellow. Now I did this first by grabbing the yellow, you see, and getting that ready, because the red is more dominant. If I had put the red down and then the yellow, I would have had to use a lot more yellow to get it to where it is now. Now I want to clean the brush. And I want to mix some purple. First, I want to put the red out. I want to mix up some purple. And I'm grabbing from the alizarin crimson, bringing it onto the palette over here. Now I want to clean out my brush again. Grab a little water, dilute some of the Prussian blue, it won't take much, and add it to the red, the alizarin crimson. Notice how that really dominates that red. That's why I grabbed the red first. I want to grab a little bit more red with this clean brush and add it to it. This is very important to get these paints ready before the painting process. This really is a very important step. Now I want to just clean that brush. And I want to prepare the paper. What I want to do is wet this all down, wet this whole paper down, and get it all wet at the same time. Then I want to add this paint, this wet paint, to the wet paper. That's why it's called wet on wet. The idea is that these colors will bleed into each other, and it'll make some neat effects. With that in mind, I only have so much control in this process. So you kind of just got to let things flow, just let it go, just have fun, and just enjoy this. So now I want to wet down this paper. I can do it with the brush, which I will be doing, but first I want to start with the spray bottle. I'm also tilting the paper. This will allow me to have more control as to the flow of the paint and also the wetness of the paper. Now with this wet brush, I want to go back and forth to even out the paper, to make sure it's wet all at the same time. I don't want it puddled, but I also don't want it dry. Also, in doing this, I don't want to keep going back and forth. I could damage the surface of the paper if I go too much over it. Now, that looks pretty good. I'm ready to add the paint. I'm going to first start with this yellow. And I'm going to start at this end of it and just put down some yellow. I want to wet the brush a little bit, grab some of the orange, and do some of the orange. Now I want to add some of the red. I don't really want to work it back and forth to bleed the colors. I want that to happen as I tilt this board. And you can see how it's bleeding together. In having a nice brush, it's easy to paint around these areas. To keep the white. With this brush, notice how I can get in a tight corner like this because it makes a good sharp point. Also, in using the brush, notice I don't push into the bristles. I'm only pulling away from the point of the brush. Also notice how wet I'm painting this area. I want this area that I'm painting to be wet all at the same time, not to have part of it dried and part of it wet. This way I'll actually be able to change it to control it. I can add paint. I can even take paint away. With the paint being wet, with the surface being dry, this is wet on dry painting.